Hello again, everybody. It's Ryan from sonofvin. Welcome to my next video. Well, this week I'm going to keep it a little more simpler than the past ones. We've got just a simple test to compare two Carménère wines. Well, not technically Carménère. One is technically Carménère. The other is technically Cabernet Gernischt, which is a Chinese wine. It's from Yantai, Shandong, China. It's something I actually picked up when I was up in Yantai six or 7 months ago myself. Well, it's the thing about Cabernet Gernischt is that for a long time, Chinese like to believe it was its own type of grape. It was just a type of Cabernet that had been long lost somewhere in France, and that somebody had brought over to China and they had started planting. Well, it wasn't until the 80s and 90s, 1990s, that somebody decided to do a DNA test and to see exactly what this Cabernet Gernischt could be. And the further they did the test, they found that it was a relative of Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, and they compared it to a Carménère DNA and found, well, here we go. This is actually the same as Carménère. So the general story is that Cabernet Gernischt comes from Cabernet gemischt, if I'm saying it correctly, which basically means in German mixed Cabernet. And somewhere along the way, it got changed into Gernischt, and it's just stuck that way in China ever since. So the story behind Carménère is rather intriguing. At one point, it was a pretty popular grape grown in Bordeaux, but during the 1800s, there was a big epidemic called the phylloxera epidemic that ended up wiping out a lot of grapes in Europe, some even in other parts of the world as well. But thankfully, a number of French winemakers had already migrated to Chile prior to this, and they had taken a number of cutlings of various grapes with them on their trip down, and for a few decades already they had been making wine in Chile using a number of these grapes they brought from France. Now, I think part of it though is that a number of these people coming from France to Chile actually thought they were bringing Merlot, not Carménère. It wasn't until several generations later that they discovered they'd actually been growing Carménère, not Merlot, which is why maybe the taste didn't seem as familiar with Merlot. So that's the general idea of how Carménère ended up in Chile. So what we've got here, I've got a Chateau Chango Castle bottle of Cabernet Gernischt from Yantai, Shandong, China. And this is something I picked up on a trip, like I said, several months back. And then as a comparison to see just how much is Cabernet Gernischt really that similar to a Carménère, I decided to pick up a Carménère from Chile from my favorite local wine store here in LA as a comparison. It is Casa Silva. Casa Silva has this family. It's a small family that runs this vineyard. They have been running this for over 100 years apparently. Probably, I think at first as helpers, and eventually the family took over it for several generations, and now here we are. We've got a really small family that still makes a really awesome Carménère that I like to buy beyond this taste test. Alright everyone, we're back. So before I get into talking about these two wines, I'd like to talk a little more about the Chinese winery itself that I bought this wine from. Their name is Changu. They were founded in 1892 by a rich Chinese man, and he basically chose Shandong, even though a lot of people didn't feel like it was a great location. He himself felt that it was a pretty good prime location to try to start making wine. He went to various places around Europe and got various cutlings of different types of grapes, thought that he would like to try, and he ended up, seems like this Cabernet Gernischt, aka Carménère, started doing really well. They also do try to make some Cabernet Sauvignons, a few sweet wines as well, but it seems like this is sort of their flagship grape they like to use, specifically from their Yantai area wineries. Now, as I mentioned earlier, they are very large now. They are basically the largest winemaker in China. They own several other chateaus around China and make different types of grapes and wines at those locations. But in the Shandong Yantai area, this is their flagship. So thought I'd just mention that before moving on to the actual wines themselves. Now, the thing about Chinese wines is they don't necessarily always put a vintage year on the front of their bottle. So you're kind of guessing a little bit about what year this wine actually was made. They like to use similar terms like the you'll see on whiskeys, 15 year, 30 year, all of those little terminologies, ports as well. But the fact is that's almost a style they're trying to go for, as if this is what the wine would taste like if it was 15 years old. Well, you can't really use that to know exactly what the vintage was. Now, the back of this bottle in Chinese says that these grapes were picked in 2009. Now, I certainly feel like it does have a hint of an older taste to it, but I can't verify that is truly the year that it was created from. Now, the Carménère here from Casa Silva, it is a 2016, so it's going to be a newer taste, a newer flavor, newer aroma than this apparently 2009 bottle from Yantai, Chang'an. So the reason I am mentioning the vintage years so specifically is this is definitely probably the number one reason these wines have a different set of aromas. They just out of the box. This one, the Chinese wine, is much more subtle. It has a hint of some chocolate, some hint of some herbs, but it's just overall a much more subtle wine as far as those aromas. Now, it has a huge amount of oak though, which from my understanding, from everything I've done as far as my experience visiting wineries in China and just some information I've learned over the years, is that they love to oak their wines very heavily. And this one has certainly got quite a bit of oak in it. The Carménère from Chile actually has a very high amount of herbal notes to it. I get a lot of fruit off the nose initial, but then there's a subtleness of herbs once I actually take my first drink. Now, overall though, I see a very good similarity between these wines. This wine potentially, we've got potentially a 2009 wine and definitely a 2016 wine. And you've got like apparently 7 years difference between the two of these. So there's going to be a sense of different herbal notes, all of that, especially the fruit from such a young wine versus an older wine. But overall, when you hit that middle of the tasting range, you sense the same wine, very similar at least, in both of these bottles. So I definitely can see where they're coming from, that this is more than likely, DNA tests. I guess I can't dispute those, but this to me is more than likely a Carménère branded Cabernet Gernischt. So something else I wanted to mention before I wrapped it up is that there are rumors that fly around in the wine world, and especially for people in China, that China loves to import bulk wines and then finish the process, bottle them, and consider them Chinese wines. And apparently makes sense that probably one of their top places this apparently does happen from is Chile. So they are taking wines, bulk wines that are made in Chile, and bringing them to China and then basically finishing them off and calling them Chinese wines. I cannot verify this myself. I've only heard it through the grapevine, as they say, so who knows, maybe this is the truth, maybe it isn't, but there is a ton of grapes being grown in China. Apparently it is second only to Spain as far as the amount of grapes on the vine. Again, I have to go based upon the numbers I've seen, the stats, but there are a lot, and I have visited a number of vineyards, and they make them to grow, to eat, and to drink in wines. So, it's something to say that their wine industry is growing quite rapidly. They are making some really good wines. Changu itself is certainly one of the front runners because they are such a large brand, but I know some smaller ones actually do make some really top-notch vintages themselves. I do certainly see a very big similarity between Cabernet Gernischt and Carménère. There's certainly similarities here, and I guess I do have to go based upon the DNA test. We aren't on Springer here, we're just drinking wines, but these two have a very good similar taste to them. One last little note, just a little hint that I almost forgot to mention is that the Chinese wine has a whole lot more acid though than the Carménère here does. And I would like to believe that is due to the temperature. It certainly gets a lot colder in Shandong than I believe it does in this area of Chile, but that's my last little bit of information. So hope you enjoyed, guys. I will see you next time. Please like, please subscribe. I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.